everyone. Welcome to Tiny Classroom Training Live. We're thrilled to have you here as we embark on enhancing your professional skills. This session focuses on generations in today's workforce and why their worldviews matter. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat as our coaches Don Zalou and Artie Nathan will be answering some as we move along. Let me pass the microphone to our esteemed coaches who will guide us through today's session. Artie and Don, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Juan. And hi, Don. Here we are doing this again. Another.
We are. Thank you, Juan. And hi, Artie. Let's get into this.
Yeah. This topic is very interesting. Years ago, when I was opening up Wynn Resorts, it was 2003, and the millennials started in the workforce then. And I remember our managers, who were baby boomers and Gen Xers, complaining to me, we got no idea how to manage, how to even talk to these millennials. And that conversation has been going on for the last 20 some odd years, as now another generation on top of the millennials is in the workforce. And I suspect that it really is a challenge for people who don't stop to think about what it is to deal with all these different generations. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
And and I have a feeling it's going to be a challenge for managers forever, because there's always going to be folks like us, baby boomers, and folks like others, millennials and Gen Xers and so on, Gen Zers and so on. So it's going to be an interesting thing. But let's break this down into parts. Artie, how many generations are there in the workplace today, do you suppose?
There are four predominantly in the workforce today, with the beginning of a fifth. There's the baby boomers that were born roughly 46 to 1946, that is, to 1964. Guys like Don and me. And before I go too much farther, I worked for my father and my uncles and my grandfather before I got into the gaming business. So I was they didn't call them baby boomers. My father was the greatest generation. Isn't that what it was called, Don?
The traditional or greatest generation, yes.
The ones who came through World War II. And I got to tell you, my father and my uncles had no idea what was going on in my head. But they weren't going to talk about it. They were just going to dismiss anything I said. That seemed to be what it was. And so this discussion today, which is one of our tiny classroom training courses in how to manage a multi-generational workforce, I think is a real interesting and important topic. So the first is baby boomers. Who else is in the workforce, Don?
Well, Generation X, they were born roughly 65 through 1980. There's millennials, or Generation Y, as some folks call them, born roughly 1981 to 96, and Generation Z, born roughly 97 to 2012. But there's a new one coming online, isn't there, Artie?
Yes, there is. It's Generation Alpha, and it was people born after 2012. Just think about that. They may be entering the workforce in very limited numbers, but they're not yet a significant presence, but they will be. And just like all the other generations before them, they're slightly different. And that difference, there's a reason for their worldview and how they look at things. So, why does this matter, Don?
Oh boy. It takes a lot of heartburn out of managing different generations, hopefully, at least if you pay attention. So having multiple generations in the workforce really matters for a bunch of reasons. One is a diverse perspective, and that's really important. And we've seen a lot of managers need to just open up to the idea of a diverse perspective rather than my way or the highway. And each generation brings different viewpoints, and experiences, which can often lead to being more innovative in problem solving and creativity. What's another, Artie?
There are communication challenges because the different generations may have varying styles of communication and preferences, which can lead to misunderstandings if they're not properly understood. And like a manager, you have to just stop and think about it. I remember when I was just getting into the workforce, and you would say things like, like, and people say, why are you using the term like, or he goes, rather than just things like that. And you get challenged as the new generation who's bringing these things up, but they're pretty common to the generation using it. What else, Don?
Well, technology adoption. The younger the generations, they tend to be more comfortable with new technologies, which can influence how quickly organizations adapt to technological changes. We have a Gen Zer or a millennial on our team in our firm, and he was surprised to learn that there were actually telephones before he was born, let alone cell phones and things like that. So we keep helping him along. What's another, Artie?
Well, you talk about these cell phones,
Mhm.
and how people use them for everything. We tend to learn, as baby boomers, tend to learn, we study things, we learn things, we internalize them, and then we use them. Whereas if there's a new topic today, or a challenge, or something that someone doesn't know, people just take out their cell phone and look it up and start using it,
Yeah.
contemporaneously. And it's unnerving to people who never worked with phones before, or phones that were so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And then there's work-life balance expectations. I got to tell you, Don and I, we work all the time. We're going to work till we drop.
Mm.
Vacations, not so much. We fit them in if we can. But different generations often have varying expectations about this work-life balance thing, which can impact company policies and culture. It can also impact how the manager gets along with the people who have these different expectations.
And it also tends to, influence retention in jobs, especially folks who are professionals or have some sort of professional credentialing. If they don't get the work-life balance that they're wanting in their lives, they'll often just change a job. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And knowledge transfer, this is really important. Older generations can pass on, valuable institutional knowledge and experience to younger workers, but only if the older workers figure out how to communicate with the younger workers to create openness and sort of cross-generational, lower the cross-generational boundaries.
And only if the generations get along to the point where the younger generation is willing to accept that information and that knowledge. Most of the time you just think, well, those old people, they're just old. We got new ideas now, and those are the only ones that matter. But it's important for both the older generation and the younger generation to get this knowledge transfer thing worked out.
It's an interesting experience that we have sometimes with our senior executive clients, boards of directors, and senior executives in firms, many of whom are baby boomers or original Gen Xers. And we like to ask a question: would you rather be right or happy in the room? And it is hilarious how often the older workers, baby boomers, will stick their hand up and say, "I want to be right," and the correct answer is, "I want to be happy." Because right things are happening and so on and so forth. It's just an interesting affect. What about leadership style, Artie?
Generational differences can influence leadership approaches and expectations, affecting the dynamics of a team and the management strategies. And just simply put, there are managers that I'm going to tell you what to do and you do it. And there are newer generations that want to be included in the discussions and the decisions. And so your leadership style has to morph with the addition of generations, because one style just doesn't fit all of these generations anymore.
That's right. That's right. So let's talk about what forms a generation's worldview. This will be important to understand as well. How do they get to where they get to in terms of how they think about the world and themselves? And it's often shaped by various factors. What's one of the first ones, Artie?
Well, the times in which you grew up form your thinking.
Yeah.
And if you think about my parents, who lived through the Great Depression and the Second World War, they didn't have much,
Big times. Yeah.
and everything was life and death during that war. And they wanted to bring up their kids not having to deal with things like that. Uh, Don and I grew up during the Vietnam War, where here was a war that was terribly unpopular, and people were protesting against it, something that our parents would never have done. Even if they disagreed with something, they certainly wouldn't protest against it. So between the historical views and the social and cultural trends, just think about, uh, again, Don and I grew up in the 60s. Just think about the music.
Yeah.
And, our parents listened to one kind of music, and all of a sudden we had taken over the record player and we're playing the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And what is this noise? And it was, we were having trouble talking to one another simply because there seemed to be such a cultural divide.
And it's a very common between generations experience, and that's not going to change as things continue to grow. And there's social and cultural trends, sort of the prevailing societal norms, popular culture, social movements, and all of that is almost shocking as you look from generation to generation. But that's very common and very prevalent, and it's part of what we have to try to understand if we're going to understand another generation.
And there's economic conditions. Like I said, my parents lived through the Great Depression, uh, but the depression or the recession in 2006, 7, and 8, the 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 housing
Bubble
boom, the
burst.
bust, and the kids that were growing up there, where their family lost their homes. I mean, just think how that would shape your thinking about economics. Um, Don and I can tell you back in 1970, and when Jimmy Carter was president, and all of a sudden gas prices skyrocketed, and interest rates skyrocketed to the point that people couldn't buy the things that for the past 15 years they had been buying. And uh, as a kid growing up in that kind of a situation, it's it certainly puts something in your mind that you can't get out. And so you have to worry about those things. And that scares people. And managers have to understand that.
Yeah. Just as a fun thought, Artie, remember when you put your first gallon of gasoline in your first car? What did it cost?
20 cents, 25 cents, maybe.
25, 35 cents.
And when it went up to 50 cents, we were like, oh, geez, that's
Oh,
terrible.
hey, I got to sell my car.
And through the years, gas prices have gone up. They've gone down a little bit, but they continue to go up. And so economic conditions, um, when you're in the workforce, you're working for something. You're working to provide for yourself and your family to have some stability. And if you're worried that you're not going to be able to make enough money to do the things you want, I think that wears on you. Just like today, where people can't buy houses. That's an economic condition that, as a baby boomer, I never thought twice about buying a house.
Yeah.
And now people, well, I guess I'm just going to rent for the rest of my life. What does that make you start thinking about in terms of savings for the future and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And even the comparison between generations. If I can't buy a house now, but my parents bought, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 in my lifetime, it often lends to a person feeling inadequate and a failure in many cases. You have to reframe that thinking. It's very important. What about technological advances? The technologies available and how they impact daily life has just been an absolute profound change. An author named Toffler in the 60s wrote about um, something he called the third wave, and it had to do with technological transformation and innovation, uh, and then there came along, what was it, Moore's law, where everything about technology changes every 18 years or something like that. And they've actually been able to define how rapidly this is happening, and yet most folks have a hard time keeping up with that rapid transition. And it's very important to think
Just
about.
think today. I mean, when somebody talks about AI, guys like Don and me go, "What's AI?" And young people in the workforce have already adopted it. They've already got Chat GPT on their smartphones, and they're using it for everything to save time. And they're not worried about what those shortcuts can mean long term for their development and their thinking. Technological advances has been going on, probably since 1850 or 1860, and Moore's law was 18 years, but today it's 18 months, and in some cases it seems like 18 minutes that the technology just jumps out ahead of us. This AI stuff, uh, every generation has got to deal with it, and they all approach it differently. So it'll be very interesting to watch this play out.
Well, I'll give you an interesting factoid. I believe that the historical anthropologists think that from the discovery of fire, the collection, the ability to manage fire, to the creation of the first bow and arrow was like 50,000 years, and so on and so forth. And now it's an hour and a half. The pace picks up as the technology gets more complicated. It's very interesting. And educational systems are very, very important. Changes in education, educational approaches and accessibility have evolved immensely. You and I already created during the pandemic something we call tiny classroom training, which is micro learning virtually presented. And yet you never would have thought of that 20 years ago at all.
I mean, just look at job descriptions and what educational level do you expect somebody to have? And traditionally, it's been, you finish your high school and you get a college degree. And fewer people are going to college today. And what's that going to mean in the world of work when the older generations think that a college degree is critical? And the younger generations say, nah, micro learning as needed is more critical. And so providing the type of training for your employees is going to change as their needs and their outlooks change. There's another thing, Don, that this parenting style.
Yeah.
Oh man. I mean, my parents, they were happy when we got on our bikes and we left in the morning, and all we had to do was come home for dinner. And yet my daughter, her children don't get out of her sight. And if they're going someplace, she takes them and she picks them up. And that, the world around us is more dangerous, and that affects our parenting styles. And how you're raised starts to create the expectations of how you want to be managed in the workplace. And so managers have to consider these things, where before it was, leave your problems at the door, and
as if you could, but yeah.
Right. So, I mean, these things are affecting the workplace. What about the media, Don? Ooh.
God. The types of media how it's consumed, how information is disseminated, whether you can believe it or not, what you can believe or not, how it skews your thinking, etc., has just immensely taken over. When you and I were growing up, it was a newspaper, and in the radio, and Huntley Brinkley on the TV, Walter Cronkite on the TV. There were 3 news channels, remember? And every night at 6 o'clock, you got hopefully the truthful news. Now you can't escape it.
Everybody's an expert. Everybody has a platform on which to discuss their views, and it's hard to discern what's right, what's not quite right, what's informed or uninformed. And so the media affects people, and they bring those ideas and those things to work, and you can't stop it. You can't shut off social media in the middle of the day or a shift. And so managers have to deal with it. And it's not like you can just say, no cell phones. I remember when we opened the Mirage and we opened the Win, you could say no cell phones at work. But today, I mean, what if my kids need me? Well, you can't deny a parent that. And so the media and the way people get their information, it has changed the way we work and the way we manage.
So, and our doing this, these tiny classroom training lives, is our utilization of media vehicle to do some micro learning and some teaching and so on. And so we've bought into it, probably at the tail end of sophistication, but we've bought into it, and it's very interesting for us to do this.
Yeah, I mean, listening to a podcast and getting your information is a
Yeah,
whole lot different than sitting in a classroom with 20 other employees and a subject expert in the front of the room telling you things.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
very different.
but why does all this matter? I mean, that's what it comes right down to. Can't we
Well,
just forget about this, Don?
no, I think a generation's worldview really matters for a variety of reasons. One, it influences how decisions are made or their decision making, both on a personal and a professional level. The choices are affected by one's worldview. And that's always been the case forever and ever. But currently, the worldview is influenced so radically and so profoundly by sort of being buried in information of one sort or another. People's worldviews tend to become more hardened in many ways, or on the opposite, and more curious and open. It's very interesting to watch how this is happening. Um,
And
what about
it shapes people's values and priorities. Different generations may prioritize different aspects of work and life, and that's important to them. And to just dismiss this as a manager, as if it doesn't matter, means that you're going to lose that employee potentially, or they're not going to be as uh, professional or productive as you want or need them to be. And so you have to understand those and deal with them. You just can't say, well, again, that's
yeah?
got nothing to do with work, when in fact it has everything to do with the people at your work.
And it also affects consumer behavior. So the marketing strategies these days have become so sophisticated, um, using the toolkit of this mass communication and mass access to information. That these marketing strategies are often very specific in their targeting of generational based groups, based on their worldview, based on current perceptions, and so on. And it's very interesting to see the stratification of how marketing has adopted to all of this, the generations and the different uh, uh, perceptions and motivators within those generations. It's very interesting.
And it affects employee behavior.
Mhm.
Again, their values and their priorities, what what they think is important is based on their worldviews. And you can't, again, you just can't dismiss these things as not being relevant to the workplace because you're going to ignore the fact that it impacts their performance and their productivity. And this next one, I mean, it impacts political and social engagement. Voting patterns, well, I mean, nobody wants to even talk about politics today in general or at the dinner table. You certainly don't want to talk about politics at work, but it's there. And you can't ignore the fact that you have this diversity of political thought and based on their level of social engagement or lack of social engagement. Voting patterns and social activism can vary between generations, within generations. I think this is one of the hot buttons today. And if you read the papers or you start talking to people in the workplace, they're worried this
Yeah,
year, like they were 4 years ago. And when there's, political differences that people still have to work together at work. And that's why work is so interesting because it forms people into groups that have to put these things aside, but they don't go away, do they, Don?
no, they do not go away. I don't want to go any further with that one right now. the and it also influences workplace expectations. We've seen this in the variety of clients that we have and how they struggle to figure out how to manage in this context. Different worldviews can lead to varying expectations about work environment, management style, career progressions, how information is shared. That millennials like to work in groups together. I mean, it's just very confusing at times unless you step way back and think about the things we're talking about here today.
And it affects communication. I mean, everything we've said today affects communication. Understanding these generational worldviews can improve intergenerational communication and collaboration. And that's really the goal of work. You want people to communicate well, to work together well, and that takes management at their best. and you can't ignore this. I mean, we're talking longer today than we talk on most of these live presentations because this is such a hot button issue in the workplace and the managers that we deal with. And once you start talking about it, it just goes on and on and on. So, how do we end this for today, Don, and get ready for the next one?
Well, just so as a recap, the idea of understanding these generational differences and their worldviews, the intent here is to help organizations create more inclusive environments, improve communications, leverage the strengths of each generation for better overall performance, and innovation. And I think the key word here is understanding it enough so that you can leverage the strengths of each generation instead of forming sort of negative attitudes. Nobody can manage these millennials and so on. That's not the case. It really is. Every one of these generations has got incredible strengths. Our job in running organizations is to figure out how to leverage those strengths.
Well, this is a great topic, and we appreciate you all being with us today. And if you have questions, get a hold of us. If you're thinking about this topic, there's a lot of information on the internet about it. And there's also Tiny Classroom Training. Our Managing a Multi-Generational Workforce covers these and many other topics. So thanks for being here. This is a great topic, and we're enjoying this.
We could have gone on for another hour just on the basics of the research we've done and what we've learned. So thank you for being here, all of you. And Artie, thanks for doing this with me again. See you in 2 weeks.